In Ukraine, a lot is happening on the ground, but we know too little about it. The counteroffensive is officially underway. That's known. But Russia has rubbished it even before it had started. And fighting has definitely intensified across Ukraine. People across the war-torn country woke up to this. Listen in. Sirens blared as Ukraine and Russia both made big claims. Kyiv claimed to gain ground back from the enemies, and Moscow claimed to have damaged German tanks and US fighting vehicles. But here on Fineprint, we want to decode the war diplomacy going on at the moment. Look at this latest statement by the French president. He says there is this counter-offensive and we want it to be as victorious as possible, so that we can then launch a phase of negotiations under the right conditions. Now that second line of his, that is what we need to take keen note of. Macron is talking about negotiations already, something that Kyiv had said will happen only when Russia returns every inch of Ukrainian land. And at least for now, Vladimir Putin looks in no mood to do that. Macron was along with Polish and German leaders, and it appeared that the leaders were sending mixed signals at a press conference, while Duda called for Ukraine to be given a clear signal on the NATO membership. Olaf Scholz from Germany was less forthcoming. He said, and I quote, "We have been discussing security guarantees since the start of the war. We have taken decisions to support Ukraine for as long as it is needed. This debate is intense between US, Germany, France, and its partners." Now, every statement that comes from the West usually ends with one line: "We will be with Ukraine as long as it takes." And this has been their line of diplomacy. But between that and the counteroffensive that is playing out, there is a lot of uncertainty. After all, it is a war. Whether this will become a turning chapter or the beginning of an endless war, that remains to be seen. All right, for more on this, we are being joined by Andreas Umland. He is an analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. Welcome to the broadcast, Andreas.
Thanks for having me.
Andreas, how long more do you feel will Zelensky be able to stand firm on having no negotiations with Russia, especially when the West is, by and large, keen on having negotiations now?
The internal pressures are such that he will not be able to conduct negotiations that imply territorial concessions. Negotiations are good, and if this war can be ended by negotiations, the Ukrainians would be the first to be happy about that. But Russia would have to withdraw its troops from Ukrainian state territory. And that can be negotiated. Anything else, I think, will be very difficult for Zelensky or any other Ukrainian politician to negotiate.
Andreas, like when we talk about entering the negotiation phase, what would a settlement look like for Ukraine and for Russia, especially when both sides are still firm on their aims?
I think it's difficult to reach a settlement because we have now two constitutions, the Ukrainian constitution and the Russian constitution, laying claim to the same territories, to the 5 annexed territories, Crimea and the 4 mainland territories annexed last year. And so it will be difficult. I think the only subject actually for negotiations could be some sort of transitory regime, perhaps, for instance, for Crimea, an international administration before the Ukrainian state comes back. Something like that could be a subject of negotiations, a UN peacekeeping mission, perhaps. Something like that I could imagine, but anything else is actually difficult to imagine now.
Right, it is definitely a far-fetched stretch of one's imagination to figure out what will be that common ground where both sides can come to the negotiation table. Thank you so much for joining in on the broadcast, sir. That was Andreas Umland joining us from Berlin.
Thank you.